They smiled, shook hands, and announced his promotion while my name sat there silent, invisible, like it had every other time. Congratulations. Cade Rollins, our new Director of Strategic Operations. Applause filled the glass-walled boardroom. Polite, controlled, predictable. I didn't clap. After 15 years of fixing broken systems, leading high-stakes projects, and quietly carrying this company through crises no one else could handle, I had learned to recognize patterns, and this one, it was painfully familiar. My name was never going to be called. I'm Fiona Bennett, 46 years old, Senior Operations Manager at Halcyon Dynamics, a mid-sized consulting firm based in Chicago. I've spent over a decade building processes that kept multi-million-dollar contracts from collapsing. I've trained entire teams, mentored future leaders, and delivered results under pressure that most executives wouldn't survive for a week. And yet, this was the 9th time. Cade had been with the company for 16 months. 16! Fresh MBA, confident speaker, excellent at presentations. But when things actually broke, when clients were on the verge of walking out, when systems failed at 2 a.m., he wasn't the one they called. I was. As the room settled, my manager, Brock Vance, turned slightly toward me with that familiar, rehearsed expression. Fiona, let's connect later about your growth path. Growth path. I almost smiled. So, that's a no again? I asked. My voice calm, steady, too steady. The room went quiet. Brock shifted in his seat. It's not a no. It's about timing. 9th time you've said that. I replied. No one spoke after that. Not Cade, not the executives, not even the people who owed their promotions to training I had personally given them. And in that silence, something inside me didn't break. It clicked. Clean. Final. Irreversible. Because in that moment, I understood something I should have realized years ago. They didn't overlook my value. They depended on it. Just not enough to reward it. Before we go on, take a moment to subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Tell me where you're listening from and what the temperature feels like there right now. This is a fictional story, shaped with the help of AI, not aimed at anyone. Now, let me take you deeper into what really happened. Halcyon Dynamics wasn't a small company. We handled complex operational transitions for corporations that were already behind and couldn't afford to fail again. When systems collapsed, when timelines slipped, when clients started threatening to walk, that's when my phone lit up. I was the one they called when things were already burning. The Ridgewell integration that was 6 weeks behind and hemorrhaging money. I stabilized it in 4 days. The Northbridge compliance audit that flagged dozens of critical failures. I rebuilt the entire reporting structure under impossible deadlines. The evergreen rollout that kept crashing during peak hours. I designed a workflow that's still running without a single incident 2 years later. No announcements, no recognition, just results. I managed a team of 12 senior analysts across multiple regions. I trained most of them myself, walked them through crisis after crisis, showed them how to think under pressure, how to lead when things didn't go according to plan. 8 of them were promoted over the years, 3 of them into roles I had formally applied for. At first, I told myself it was timing, that leadership needed to see more consistency, more visibility, more proof, that if I just kept delivering, kept solving problems no one else could handle, eventually it would align. That's what Brock Vance always said. Your time is coming, Fiona. Just a little more patience. He had a way of saying it that sounded sincere, like he believed it himself, like the delay was temporary, reasonable, even necessary. So I waited. Another quarter, another year. Another crisis solved quietly in the background, while someone else stood in front of a slide deck presenting outcomes I had built. What I didn't realize back then was how convenient my position had become for them. I wasn't just reliable. I was essential exactly where I was. Promoting me would mean replacing me, training someone else, risking instability in the very systems they depended on to keep revenue flowing. So instead, they kept me in place, not because I lacked value, because I had too much of it in the wrong role. The meeting didn't end when the promotion was announced. It just shifted into something colder, quieter. Like everyone was pretending nothing important had just happened. Brock moved on to the next agenda item, talking about quarterly targets and operational efficiency as if my question hadn't been sitting in the middle of the room unanswered. Numbers filled the screen. People nodded. Pens moved across notebooks. I sat there, still, listening, but not really hearing any of it, because I already knew what mattered had been said. After a few minutes, Brock circled back, his tone softer now, like he was trying to repair something without admitting it was broken. "Fiona, you have to understand," he said, leaning slightly forward. "You're incredibly valuable where you are." There it was. Simple, polished, final. The kind of sentence that sounds like praise until you realize what it actually means. I nodded once, slowly, letting it settle. "So I'm valuable enough to fix everything when it goes wrong," I said, keeping my voice even. "Just not valuable enough to lead it before it does." A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone coughed. No one met my eyes. Brock gave a tight smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "It's not about that. Leadership decisions are complex." "Who's making them?" I asked. Silence again. Thicker this time. Cade Rollins stared down at his notes like they might save him. The executives avoided looking in my direction altogether. It was as if acknowledging the question would make it real. Brock straightened slightly. "Let's keep this professional." "I am," I replied. "I'm asking why the person already doing the work isn't even considered for the title." He didn't answer that. Instead, he glanced at the screen and continued the meeting, moving forward like I hadn't spoken, like the moment could just be folded away and forgotten. But it couldn't, because something had shifted, not in the room, but in me. It wasn't the rejection. I had lived with that for years. It was the ease of it, the way it was delivered publicly, casually, without hesitation or consequence. That was the line, not the 9th rejection. The realization that there would always be a 10th. I didn't resign that day. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't send a late-night email. Didn't walk into Brock's office demanding answers. From the outside, nothing changed. I showed up the next morning at the same time, opened my laptop, answered messages, joined calls, solved problems, just like always. That was the point, because the shift wasn't in what I did. It was in what I stopped doing. When someone asked how I fixed an issue, I gave them the solution, not the reasoning behind it. No walkthroughs, no extra context, no quiet mentoring layered into casual conversations. If leadership asked whether something was resolved, I said yes or no. I didn't add the explanation that made them sound informed in front of clients. I stopped translating complexity into simplicity for people who hadn't earned that clarity. Emails became shorter. Meetings became quieter. I spoke when necessary, and when I did. I chose my words carefully, without filling in the gaps others left behind. At first, no one noticed. Why would they? The work was still getting done. Systems stayed stable. Clients weren't complaining. From their perspective, everything was functioning exactly as before. But underneath that surface, something important had been removed. I stopped catching problems before they became visible. If something wasn't clearly my responsibility, I let it move through the system instead of intercepting it. I answered requests during working hours instead of immediately. Even when I saw them earlier, I closed conversations once the question was addressed, instead of turning them into extended guidance sessions. It wasn't resistance. It was precision. For years, I had been smoothing edges no one even realized were sharp. Now, I let those edges exist, not to create chaos, but to reveal where it was already waiting. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the weight I had been carrying alone began to settle back where it belonged. What I started doing next wasn't obvious, but it was deliberate. I began documenting everything, not in a dramatic, collecting evidence kind of way. There was no hidden agenda, no plan for confrontation. I simply wanted clarity, a clear picture of where my time was going, what problems I was actually solving, and who was supposed to be responsible for them. So I kept a private log, every issue that landed on my desk, the time it was reported, the path it took before it reached me, the actual root cause, and how long it took to fix once I got involved. Patterns started forming faster than I expected. Requests that should have been handled by Cade Rollins' team were consistently escalating past them. Not immediately. Of course. There was always a delay first. A few hours of back-and-forth emails, some surface-level troubleshooting. Then eventually, quietly, someone would message me, "Fiona, can you take a quick look at this?" I always did, and I always fixed it. But now, I recorded it. One client in particular, Arden Logistics, became impossible to ignore. They had recurring system failures that triggered support tickets almost weekly. According to the organizational structure, Cade's team owned those issues. In reality, they circled around them until time ran out, then handed them off. To me, I tracked every instance. The original ticket time, the escalation delay, the moment I stepped in, the resolution. The difference was embarrassing. Hours of confusion reduced to minutes of clarity. Still, I didn't say anything. I didn't interrupt meetings when Cade summarized his team's progress. I didn't correct the narrative when leadership praised efficiency improvements. I let the words stand exactly as they were spoken, because for the first time, I wasn't interested in being recognized. I was interested in being accurate, and accuracy has a way of surfacing on its own when you stop distorting reality to make others comfortable. As the weeks passed, small cracks began to appear. Timelines slipped in places they hadn't before. Questions started coming in with more urgency, less confidence. People followed up more often. Not because I was doing less, but because they were seeing more of what had always been there. The system hadn't changed. Visibility had. The first real shift didn't come from conflict. It came from a question no one was prepared to answer. It happened during our monthly executive review, the kind where leadership presents polished numbers to make everything look controlled, slides filled with percentages, performance metrics, client satisfaction scores, clean, reassuring, carefully framed. Brock Vance was leading the presentation. He spoke with confidence about improved response times, stronger delivery pipelines, and increased operational efficiency, the kind of language that sounds impressive but rarely explains anything real. Then one of the board members leaned forward and asked, "Can you walk us through a specific example of how those improvements were achieved?" A simple question. Brock paused for just a second too long. He started explaining in broad terms. Cross-functional alignment, better communication, streamlined processes, the usual vocabulary that fills space without saying much. The board member didn't interrupt. He just listened, and then asked again, "Who specifically drove the Arden Logistics turnaround?" The room shifted. Brock glanced briefly at his notes, then said, "It was a team effort." That's when the attention moved. "Toward me, Fiona," the board member said. "You've been quiet. What's your perspective?" There was a moment there, a very small one, where I could have stepped in and reinforced the narrative, smoothed it out, made it easier for everyone. I didn't. "I can walk you through the technical details," I said calmly. He nodded. So I did. No embellishment, no ownership language, just facts. What the issue was, how it was initially handled, where the delays occurred, what the actual root cause turned out to be, and how it was resolved, step by step. The room went still. No one interrupted. No one corrected me, because there was nothing to correct. When I finished, another board member asked about a different project, then another, each time. I answered the same way, clearly, directly, without assigning credit or taking it. But by the end of that meeting, something had become undeniable. Not through accusation, through clarity, for the first time. The gap between perception and reality wasn't being managed. It was being seen. I didn't make a dramatic decision to leave. I made a quiet one to prepare. There's a difference. Leaving is emotional. Preparation is strategic. I started with the things no one could see. Updating my portfolio, not with responsibilities, but with outcomes, before and after states, measurable impact, systems stabilized, revenue protected, clients retained. I wrote it all down in a way that made the value undeniable, even outside the walls of halcyon dynamics. Then I reached out carefully. Former colleagues who had already left, clients I had worked closely with over the years, not asking for anything, just reconnecting, conversations about the industry, about challenges, about what was changing, listening more than speaking. At the same time, I adjusted my routines. I set boundaries around my availability. Still reliable, still responsive, but no longer immediate. If something came in late without urgency, it waited. If a request lacked clarity, I asked for it instead of filling in the gaps myself. It forced something interesting to happen. People had to think before asking. Inside the company, I paid closer attention to patterns, which projects assumed my involvement without saying it, which deadlines quietly depended on me stepping in at the last minute, which clients asked for me by name before decisions were finalized. It wasn't subtle. Dependence had been built into the system, but no one had measured it. Financially, I made adjustments too, reduced unnecessary expenses, built a buffer that removed urgency from any decision I might need to make. I didn't want to leave out of frustration. I wanted to leave because I could. Meanwhile, nothing on the surface changed. I still showed up, still delivered, still kept things running, which made it even harder for anyone to recognize what was happening beneath it, because the more stable everything looked, the more they assumed it always would be. And that assumption was about to cost them more than they realized. The breaking point didn't arrive with a warning. It arrived as a failure. Cade Rollins's flagship project, his signature win, was a large-scale operational migration for one of our biggest clients. Crestline Manufacturing, a multi-million-dollar contract that leadership had been celebrating for weeks. 3 weeks into deployment, everything collapsed. Core systems went offline during peak hours. Orders froze. Data syncing failed across regions. Within minutes, Crestline's operations were effectively paralyzed. Panic spread fast. Emergency calls, late-night meetings. Consultants pulled in. Cade's team scrambling to identify the issue, sending updates that sounded confident but said very little. Hours passed with no resolution. Then the call came to me. It was close to midnight. "Fiona, I know this isn't your project," Brock said, his voice tighter than usual. "But we need you to take a look." I didn't ask questions. I logged in. It took me less than 20 minutes to find the problem. A fundamental configuration error in their data synchronization protocol. Something that should have been caught in early testing. Something basic. Fixing it took under 2 hours. I documented the issue, implemented the correction, and sent a concise technical summary. No commentary, no escalation. By morning, the system was stable. Crestline resumed operations, and just like that, the crisis was over. Later that day, an email went out to leadership. Cade thanked his team for their resilience, spoke about collaboration under pressure, highlighted the importance of adaptive problem-solving. My name wasn't mentioned. I read it once, then closed it, because by then, something more important had already happened. An hour after that email, Crestline's CTO reached out to me directly. Not through account management, not through leadership. To me, "Fiona," he said, "we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. Can you personally oversee the rest of this transition?" That was the moment. Not when the system failed, not when I fixed it, but when the client made it clear they knew exactly who they trusted. And it wasn't the person with the title. I didn't wait for another meeting. I didn't wait for another promise. I chose the timing carefully. 2 days before quarter close, when reports were being finalized and client commitments were under the highest scrutiny, I walked into Brock Vance's office and placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. My resignation. He read the first line, then looked up at me. Confusion settling in before anything else. "This feels sudden," he said. It wasn't. It had been years in the making. "I'm giving 3 weeks' notice," I replied. He leaned back. studying me like he was trying to find the version of me that would reconsider. Is this about the promotion? No, I said calmly. It's not about that anymore. That was the part he didn't understand, because for them, everything was still framed around titles. For me, it had moved far beyond that. Within an hour, my calendar filled with meeting requests, conversations labeled urgent, messages asking for clarification, for context, for reassurance. By the end of the day, the tone had shifted. The first offer came quickly: a private meeting, a career discussion, a revised title, a salary increase, flexibility. I declined. The second came the next morning, more direct: 30% increase, director title, immediate effect. I declined again, by Monday. The urgency was visible. Leadership meetings became shorter, sharper, questions more pointed. They wanted to know what would break, what would slow down, what depended on me that no one had documented. I answered exactly what was asked. Nothing more. Then the bigger offers started coming: equity participation, strategic leadership role, a newly created division with my name attached to it, even a suggestion carefully phrased that Cade's position could be reconsidered. It didn't matter, because none of it addressed the one thing that had already changed: my decision. By the second week, clients had started asking questions, not about the company, about me. And that was when the real panic began. Not inside the boardroom, but outside of it, where the consequences actually lived. I didn't make an announcement when I left. No farewell speech, no dramatic exit, no final message to prove a point. I simply walked away. But the silence didn't last long. Within a week, Crestline Manufacturing reached out again. This time, not through Halcyon Dynamics, but directly to me. They didn't ask where I had gone. They asked what it would take to work with me independently. That conversation turned into my first contract, a multi-million-dollar agreement to oversee their entire operational infrastructure. Then Arden Logistics followed. Then 2 more clients I hadn't even worked with directly, but who had heard my name through industry circles. Word travels fast when results are consistent. By the end of the first month, I wasn't looking for opportunities anymore. I was choosing between them. Meanwhile, Halcyon Dynamics was trying to stabilize something they didn't fully understand. Projects slowed. Clients started escalating concerns. Some contracts weren't renewed. Others were quietly pulled. Without the layer of support I had been providing, the gaps didn't just appear, they widened. Leadership changed their structure twice in a matter of months. Brock Vance stepped down not long after. Cade Rollins was reassigned, moved into a role that carried less visibility, less responsibility. They tried to rebuild. They hired new people, experienced ones, capable, on paper. But experience isn't something you replace overnight. 6 months later, I was running my own firm with a small team and a growing client base. The smallest contract I held was already worth more than my old salary. The largest one exceeded anything I had ever managed inside Halcyon. People like to call stories like this revenge. It wasn't. I didn't take anything from them. I just stopped giving what they never truly valued. And once that happened, everything else revealed itself. If you would walk away like I did, choosing self-worth over waiting endlessly right, you did a great job, so I know that choice resonates with you. If you'd rather stay, accept less, and keep the peace, write no promotion needed. And if you see it differently, share your thoughts. I'd truly want to hear your story. I used to believe that loyalty and hard work would eventually be enough, that if I kept showing up, fixing problems, and carrying more than my share, someone would finally notice. But what I learned is this: people often see your value long before they choose to reward it. And sometimes, the hardest but most important decision is to stop proving yourself to those who have already made up their minds. Real growth begins the moment you choose self-respect over silent endurance. If this story spoke to you, your simple action subscribing, liking, or sharing might help someone else find the courage to make a better choice. You're not just watching a story, you're helping change someone's life.